Virgo, this is very specific, and I need you to understand what I mean by that before anything else is said. Because there are readings that speak in generalities, that paint in broad strokes, that offer the kind of message that could belong to anyone willing to claim it. This is not that. What I am about to share with you tonight has a precision to it that I did not expect when I sat down with your energy. A specificity that kept narrowing and narrowing the more I stayed with it, until what remained was not a general truth about people in general circumstances, but something that feels unmistakably, uncomfortably, almost invasively directed at you, at your particular situation, at the two specific areas of your life that are currently moving in ways you may not have fully recognized as connected. They are connected. That is the first specific thing. The situation with money and the situation with love, whatever form each of those is currently taking in your life, whatever chapter each of them is currently in, are not two separate stories running on parallel tracks. They are one story fed by the same root, governed by the same internal logic, blocked, if they are blocked, by the same underlying belief, and opening, if they are opening, through the same crack in the same wall that you may not yet have identified, but that the energy around you tonight is pointing toward with an insistence I cannot ignore. Let me start with what I feel first, which is a particular quality of constriction, not permanent constriction. I want to be clear about that immediately, because what I am feeling is not the energy of something fixed, but the energy of something that has been fixed and is beginning at its edges to loosen. But the constriction itself is real, and it has been present for long enough that it may have begun to feel like simply the natural state of things, like the normal temperature of your life. Like the water a fish swims in, so consistently present that the idea of different water has become difficult to imagine from the inside. The water is about to change in both areas. And the specific thing I want to say about the connection between them is this: somewhere in your interior life, in the architecture of what you believe about yourself and what you deserve and what is genuinely available to people like you in a world like this, there is a room where money and love are stored together, not separately, not in their own distinct compartments, but together, governed by the same set of rules, subject to the same set of limits, running on the same fuel of the same underlying story about your worth. And what that means practically is that what shifts in one tends to shift in the other. What opens in one creates pressure on the door of the other. What heals in one sends ripples through the ground the other is standing on. This is specific. This is the thing I kept coming back to in your energy, the particular and unusual way these two currents are braided together in you more tightly than they are in most people, in a way that makes the work of one inseparable from the work of the other. And the reason I am telling you this is not to add complexity to what is already complex. It is to give you a key. Because if you have been working on one of these areas and wondering why the other feels resistant, or if you have been addressing the external circumstances of one without touching what lives beneath both, this may be the explanation. And explanations, when they are accurate, have a way of changing everything about what becomes possible next. Let me speak to love first. There is someone, or the possibility of someone, the approaching reality of someone in the territory ahead of you whose presence in your life may arrive with a completeness that surprises you. Not the familiar, incomplete version, not the version that is good in some ways and insufficient in others, that gives warmth with one hand and withholds something essential with the other, that asks you to accept partial as though partial were the best available option. What I feel approaching in the love dimension of your energy has a different quality, a wholeness to it, a sense of someone who is genuinely available, not performing availability while actually being somewhere else, not offering the vocabulary of presence while practicing the art of strategic distance, but actually fundamentally, structurally there. That quality, genuine availability may be rarer in your experience than it should have been. There may have been a pattern running through the love chapters of your recent life of connecting with people who were in some crucial way unavailable, emotionally, circumstantially, psychologically unavailable in the specific way that keeps the connection perpetually at a certain temperature, never quite reaching the warmth that genuine mutual presence creates, never quite resolving into the settled, solid, deeply nourishing thing you were actually reaching for underneath the surface of the reaching. That pattern is not random. Patterns never are. They are the external expression of something internal, something in the story you carry about what love is supposed to feel like, something in the calibration of what feels familiar enough to be safe, something that may have been set a long time ago and has been running quietly ever since, selecting for a certain kind of dynamic without your conscious instruction. That calibration may be shifting. The pattern may be breaking. And the break, when it becomes fully visible, could look like the arrival of someone who initially feels slightly unfamiliar, not in a foreign or uncomfortable way, but in the specific way that genuinely available people feel unfamiliar to someone whose nervous system has been tuned to unavailability. They may feel almost too present, too consistent, too reliably there in a way that the part of you still running the old calibration interprets as somehow suspicious, because in the old pattern, that level of presence always had a catch, always turned out to be temporary, always came with a hidden cost that revealed itself only after you had fully invested. Watch for that suspicion if it arises. Not to suppress it, it deserves acknowledgement. It has a history and a logic and a genuine protective function. But watch for the possibility that this time the suspicion is working from an outdated file, that the consistency it is bracing against is not the precursor to a familiar disappointment, but simply consistency, the real kind, the sustainable kind. The kind that does not require you to hold your breath waiting for the other shoe, because in this particular connection, there is no other shoe. Now let me speak to money, and I want to do this with the same specificity, because the energy here is equally precise and equally insistent on being spoken accurately rather than vaguely. What I feel in the financial dimension of your life is not the absence of capacity, it is the presence of a block. A specific, located, addressable block that has been operating not at the level of skill or effort or intelligence, all of which are considerable in you, but at the level of permission. The internal permission to have, to accumulate, to receive and hold rather than receive and lose. To build something that lasts rather than watching things arrive and then watching them with a predictability that has begun to feel almost like a law of nature find their way out again. That law of nature is not a law of nature. It is a story. dressed in the clothing of inevitability, wearing the mask of simply how things are for someone like you, but underneath the costume, a story. One that was written in response to real experiences, real losses, real moments where having something good was followed closely enough by losing it that the nervous system began to draw a connection between the two, between having and losing, between receiving and the pain that followed the receiving, and at some point quietly, without announcement, began to short-circuit the receiving in order to avoid the pain, began to leak money, to self-sabotage financial opportunities, to make the small and barely visible decisions that kept abundance at a careful and self-protective distance. This is the specific thing, the connection between the love pattern and the money pattern. Both of them, at their root, may be running on the same fear, the fear of having something good and then losing it. The fear that receipt is always temporary, that abundance in any form is always followed by its removal, that the safest relationship with anything genuinely valuable is the one that maintains enough distance to make the loss, when it comes, survivable. Both the love pattern and the money pattern, when you look at them through this lens, may reveal themselves as variations on the same protective strategy. Different domains, same logic. Same story, different costumes, and here is the specific, practical, genuinely consequential implication of that connection. When you do the work of healing one, when you address the root story in one domain, when you practice the specific courage of receiving fully and holding without immediately anticipating loss, the other domain begins to shift in response. Not as magic, not as the universe rewarding good behavior, but as the natural consequence of changing a belief that was governing both areas simultaneously. Pull the root and both plants feel it. Heal the story and both its expressions begin to change. Something is already changing. I feel it in your energy as the loosening I mentioned at the beginning, that quality of constriction beginning to give at its edges. Something has happened or is happening or has been building toward happening that has touched the root story in a way that the surface level experiences of the recent past did not quite reach. A realization, perhaps, a moment of genuine seeing, of looking at the pattern and recognizing it as a pattern rather than as simply the truth of your life. That recognition, however quiet and however private, is more powerful than it feels. It is the specific kind of internal event that the outer world responds to, sometimes slowly, sometimes with a speed that surprises by beginning to reorganize itself around the new understanding. The reorganization may already be in progress in the love dimension, in the money dimension, in the braided place where both of them live together at their root, and what it is reorganizing toward, what the loosening is making room for, is a version of your life in which having is not followed automatically by losing, in which receiving is allowed to become accumulating, in which someone genuinely available does not trigger the old protective withdrawal, but is instead met with the full, open, undefended presence of someone who has finally, after everything, given themselves permission to be loved without bracing for its removal. That permission is the specific thing, the most specific thing in this entire reading. The one thing that, if it shifts, if it moves from withheld to granted, from theoretical to actual, from something you understand intellectually to something you embody changes both stories simultaneously. You do not need to fix the money and fix the love separately, addressing each as its own independent problem with its own independent solution. You need to grant the permission at the level where both of them live, at the root, in the room where they are stored together, governed together, limited together by the same story about the same fear. Grant it. Not all at once. That is not how permission works at this depth, not how the nervous system releases a protection it has been maintaining for years, but incrementally, in the small, daily, accumulating acts of allowing yourself to receive without immediately preparing for loss, of letting good things settle rather than holding them lightly in anticipation of their going, of choosing consciously and repeatedly to relate to abundance in love, in money, in the simple daily experience of things going well as something you are allowed to have, not temporarily, not on loan, actually, durably, deservedly yours. This is very specific, and the specificity of it, the particular located, addressable nature of what is blocking and what is opening is itself the gift of this reading. Because vague problems require vague solutions, and vague solutions rarely change anything. But a specific problem has a specific answer. And the specific answer here, the one the energy of your life is pointing toward with everything it has tonight, is simply this: you are allowed to have good things in love, in money, at the same time, without one negating the other, without requiring losing, without the receipt of something beautiful in one area demanding sacrifice in another, both at once, fully, without apology and without the protective strategy of wanting less than you actually want in order to be less disappointed by the gap between wanting and having. That is what is possible. That is what the energy is organizing itself around. That is the specific and extraordinary thing that may be forming in your life right now, in the braided space where love and money share their root, not as a promise, not as a guarantee, but as a genuine and available and closer than it feels possibility for someone who has finally, in the quiet of everything they have been through, begun to believe they might be allowed to have it. If this found you somewhere specific tonight, if it named something precise that you have been circling without being able to locate, trust that precision. It is real. Stay close, subscribe, and come back, because the story unfolding in your energy right now deserves to be followed all the way through, both threads of it, all the way to where they arrive together at the life that was always waiting for you to grant yourself permission to inhabit it.